Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And I'm going to start the screen share. I think I can. Let's see where I have it. Give me a moment, and I'm going to do this. Okay, there we are. That should make it easier to do. And there we are. So you can see that we are in the Parsha of Tisa, and it comes slap bang in the middle of the construction of the tabernacle, although it also mentions the construction and some other details. It starts off, we started this actually last year, as you can see, we are into the Parsha a little bit, with the half shekel contribution. And Rashi is going to explain to us some more details about that half shekel contribution. Then also, we also read some issues about a laver that they made with which the priests would wash their hands and their feet before they performed the ceremony. So we're going to continue here with this particular parsha about this half shekel contribution. It says so.
So are you in chapter 30, verse 15?
Correct. That is correct. Okay. And here it says, Ha'ashir lo yarbeh, the wealthy person shouldn't give more. V'hadal lo yamit, and the poor person shouldn't give less. Mimachatzit hashekel, from the half shekel. La'tet et trumat Hashem, to donate the gift, you might call it, of Hashem, or the truma donation. L'chaper al nafshotechem, in order to atone for your souls. And there's some interesting issues here. First of all, the text itself that says that this half shekel contribution, which we know comes in the context of taking a census of the Jewish people, of the Israelites. We know it involved only males 20 years old and up. We were talking specifically about numbering these males so that they could serve in the army, because at this point, they had not been given the 40 years punishment. They were going to head on into the land of Canaan in order to conquer it. And so they had to start organizing themselves as a military force to conquer the 7 nations that were in the land of Canaan. And so we read about this here, and we read that they're not to actually take a census except by means of this half shekel contribution. If you go back to last year's session, the last session we did last year, I was reading a lengthy Torah Tamima, which explains that even though it says the wealthy should not give more and the poor should not give less, in the Talmud, it understands that as more of a suggestion rather than a command. And they talk about the fact that, in fact, the wealthy did give more and the poor did give less. And Torah Tamima goes into discussing, well, if that was the case, then how would they get an accurate count? And he explains how that could still happen. Essentially, they'd club together, that is, rich people and poor people could make a group, and they knew exactly what the total should be in order to get an accurate count. So, for example, if there were 10 people in the group, regardless, you'd want to see 50 shekels, right? Or rather, 5 shekels. It's a half shekel contribution. And then it explains how much the shekel was, that it was Esrim Geirah, it was 20 Geirahs. So the rich people might give more and the poor people might give less, but as long as they came up with a total of 5 shekels, it would be okay. So that's summarizing the Torah Tamima from last year. So let's go into the Rashi on this here. So it says, he goes, forgive me, let's see if this will work. No, it won't. Oh, my heavens. Okay, let's see what I can do here. All right, so it says, L'chaper al nafshotechem, to atone for your souls. He explains this. Shelo tinakpu al yedei minyan, so that you should not be plagued by means of taking account. So there was a sense in this culture that when you started to number things by numbering them directly, for those of you who know about the Ain Hara, the evil eye, somehow doing that would lend those objects vulnerable to plague. Somehow it made things vulnerable. And so that's why they would substitute this half shekel for the soul of the person. Let's keep going. Davar acher. So in other words, to atone for your souls, the idea that if anything was found faulty with any one of those souls, they would be troubled by a plague. It could be deadly. And we read about David doing such a thing and there being a plague as a result of it. At any rate, so much for that. Davar acher, another interpretation. Lechaper al nafshotechem, to atone for your souls. Lefi she rimez lahem kan, because he suggests to them, he hints to them kan here, shlosha trumot. There are three donations, three sets of donations. Shenichtav kan, Trumat Hashem Gimel Pa'amim, because here the allusion is the fact that the text writes the phrase Trumat Hashem 3 times. So let's take a look at how this is the case. And I actually put in a little note to number them. So here is Truma Hashem first time. And on this page, we see it here, Trumat Hashem a second time, and a third time, Trumat Hashem. And this would come under remez. You know that is one of the 4 ways in which one can interpret the Torah. It's because it doesn't say it directly. It's just a suggestive idea that gets pulled out of the text because of the question as to why it would have to repeat this particular phrase 3 times and couldn't just substitute a pronoun of some kind instead of mentioning the noun itself 3 times. So it suggests 3 trumot, 3 different trumot. Trumat adanim, right? Achat trumat adanim. One would be the truma of the sockets. And those, if you have the visualization of the construction of the tabernacle itself, the central structure of the tabernacle was made up of boards, lengthy boards that were set up vertically, and those boards sat on silver sockets. There were 2 silver sockets on the bottom end of each board and there was like a mortise and tenon kind of arrangement. And the sockets would slide up and down these tenons on the bottom of the board and therefore accommodate the terrain. So each one, so that they were made out of silver, and this is what the silver went to. Shemina'an, that he counted them, right? They counted the Israelites, keshehitchilu benidvat hamishkan, when they started off by taking contributions for the Mishkan. So they also took a half shekel at that time, and the silver that was collected from the half shekels went to these adanim, to these sockets. V'natnu kol echad ve'echad machatzit hashekel, and each and every individual, we're understanding, of course, males 20 years old and up, would give a half shekel, va'ala lema'at hakikar, and this added up to 100 talents. Shne'emar, as it states explicitly in Exodus 30, it looks like Exodus 35, possibly, yeah. The kesef pekudei, let me make sure, yeah.
Mine says Exodus 38,
Yeah.
verse 25.
Thank you. It's hard to read. You see, there's a space here which makes it look like a hey, but it's 38. Thank you, Lauren. I wasn't sure. The Kesef Pekudei Haida says in Exodus chapter 38, the silver from the counting of the people, right? Me'at kikar was 100 talents, umehen ne'esu ha'adanim, and from them they were made the sockets. It says that in the text. Shne'emar, and it says, Vayhi me'at kikar ha'kesef, and it says the 100 talents of silver, etc. So there were, remember, about 600,000 plus Israelite males 20 years and up. They would each be giving a half shekel, and I believe that would come to 3,000 shekels, and a talent is 3,000. Let me make sure, right? 100 talents from the fact that a talent was 3,000 shekels. So that would make 100 talents, if my arithmetic is correct at this time in the morning. Okay. There were actually more than that, but they had silver usage for other things as well, but essentially 600,000, right? We know that number. Vahashenit, and the second truma, afhi al yedei minyan, this too was done by means of taking account. Shemina'an mishehukam hamishkan, because they were counted again once the tabernacle was set up. So the first counting is before the tabernacle is set up. The second counting through these half shekels was done after the tabernacle was set up. Hu haminyan ha'amur, and this is the counting that is mentioned, betchilat chomesh hapikudim, which is mentioned at the beginning of the book of Numbers. In fact, it's mentioned in chapter 1. And this term chomesh hapikudim, which is one of the names that is given in Hebrew to the book of Bamidbar, is chomesh would be a fifth. In other words, 1/5 of the Chumash, right? We call the Torah also the Pentateuch, right? Because there are 5 books, and it's one of the 5 books, and Pekudim means referring to the numbering, the counting. So in some ways, we also have a Hebrew term that refers to the 4th book as Numbers. Be'echad lachodesh hasheni, this took place on the first day of the 2nd month, B'shna Hashenit, which was in the 2nd year. That's when the tabernacle was actually set up and finished, completed, and ready for usage. Mishehukam hamishkan, B'shnat Hashenit. V'natnu kol echad machatzit hashekel, and every individual gave a half shekel contribution. And what was this for? V'hein liknot mehen korbanot tzibur shel kol shana shana. And they went to purchase the public offerings each and every year. V'hushvu bahen aniyim v'ashirim. And when it came to both these countings, the poor and the wealthy were exactly on the same level. Va'alotah truma, and regarding that particular gift, donation, ne'emar, it's stated, l'chaper al nafshotechem, that's the one that is stated with regards to atone for your souls. Why? She'akorbanot l'kapara hem ba'im, because those sacrifices are brought to atone. That's why they're there. So that's counting for 2. And hashlishit, and the 3rd time, that's the 3rd mention here, he trumat hamishkan, that is a reference to the gifts that they brought, the donations they made, simply to construct the tabernacle. That was mentioned at the beginning of Parsha Truma. K'moshe ne'emar, as it states in Shemot, and this is Lamed Hey?
Yes.
Exodus 35, Kol Meirim Trumat Kesef, and it says, everyone who donated silver, unachoshet, and brass, velo haita yad kulam shaveh. And Rashi says, in this regard, people brought whatever amount they could afford to bring or wanted to bring. This was not the half shekel, this particular truma. Shaveba. In this one, it wasn't that everybody brought exactly the same amount. Ela ish ma shenidvo libo. It says regarding that truma, it says asher yidvenu libo, whose heart so moves him. So each person brought whatever they wanted. And here are now the three trumot that are actually to be referenced. So there's a custom, I just actually read it this year for the first time in the conservative Luach, that of course we're coming up this coming week to Parshat Shkalim. That's purely a coincidence that we're reading from that in the regular Torah reading cycle. It's a coincidence. It doesn't happen all that often. They're always close together, just not exactly on the same week. So that in fact, this is a time, there's a custom even nowadays to donate a half shekel the donation is actually made on Purim. When you read the Megillah, that's when you actually make the donation. And so what you would do is get a 50-cent piece. Thank goodness they still mint them. And actually the custom was to give 3 50-cent pieces to reference these 3 trumot. And we're going to try and do it this year. So Lee went and purchased a whole bunch of 50-cent pieces. And what we'll do is people can donate to purchase a 50-cent piece or 3 50-cent pieces, and hopefully we'll collect them at Purim. So this is the basis of a custom that actually even takes place nowadays in remembrance of what we just read here.
So 5 dimes wouldn't work. It has to be a single coin.
Correct. Yes.
Because a 50-cent piece isn't a shekel any more than 5 dimes is.
No, but we consider the shekel to be in this. So in the United States, it's $1 would be the shekel, and shekel would be the 50-cent piece.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And yeah, so that's how that goes.
The half dollar, okay.
If we wanted to copy it exactly, if we were basing it on this Rashi, you could get 2 50-cent pieces. And if you wanted to give another $5, or if you wanted to get 5 dimes or whatever, or you wanted to give a penny, you could do all of that for the third one. It's just that 2 of them at least need to be 50-cent pieces. I guess if we were looking at the Rashi carefully. Going on. The lakachta et kesef hakipurim, you should take the silver of atonement, me'et bnei Israel, from the sons, we'll translate it as sons now, the sons of Israel, v'natata oto, and you should give it over al avodat ohel moed, regarding the work of the tent of meeting. So we know that this truma that he's talking about here appears to be the silver that would go for the sockets. Livnei Israel, and it should be for the Israelites, lezicharon lifnei Hashem, as a remembrance before Hashem, lechaper al nafshotechem, to atone for their souls. So we'll take a look at the next Rashi, and here we go. And you should give it for the sake of the work of the tent of meeting. Lamadata, so you learn from this, shenitztavu limnotan betchilat nidvat hamishkan, that they were commanded to count them. In other words, they were commanded to be mustered, to be counted, betchilat, at the beginning of the contributions of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. In other words, prior to the tabernacle being erected, they had to make this contribution for the work of the tabernacle. Achar ma'aseh ha'egel, and this happened after the incident of the golden calf. So what's interesting here is that the Torah gives 2 parshiot prior to Tisa. This is the parsha where we will read about the incident of the golden calf. And then afterwards, we have two parshiot that also speak about the tabernacle. And in fact, the tabernacle was constructed after the incident. Mipnei, why? Shenichnas bahem magefa, because after they worshipped the golden calf, there was a plague. Kamosha Katuv, as we read in Exodus 32, Vayigof Hashem et ha'am, and Hashem sent a plague against the people after they worshipped the golden calf. And here's a lovely Rashi, Mashal. There's a parable. Letzon hachaviva al ba'aleha, to sheep who were beloved to their owner. The owner had some prize sheep. Shenafal ba dever, and what happened was, cattle plague. I suppose it would be more a flock plague, but at any rate, this plague started to kill off this person's sheep. Mishe pasak, and when the plague was over, Amar lo leroeh, this owner said to his shepherd, Bevakasha mimcha, please, if you will, Maneh et soni, please count my sheep, my flock, Veda, and know, so as to know, Kama notru, how many were left over. Bahem, notru bahem is the phrase. Lehodia, to make known, shehi chaviva alav, and what this connotes is how precious they were to the owner, because he cared how many, specific number of how many were left over after so many of them died. So, of course, the parable is that the owner is God and the shepherd is Moses and the flock is the flock of Israel, and that God said, explaining why God says to Moses specifically to count the people at this particular point, and that it's actually an indication of divine love. Ve'ifshar lomar, and you cannot argue, shehaminyan hazeh hu ha'amor b'chomash ha'pikudim. Even though you might try to argue that since the Chomesh HaPikudim is talking about the half shekel contribution, and this is talking about a half shekel contribution, that they're one and the same. They are not one and the same. And he says, you can prove it. Shaharei ne'emar bo, because with regards to the census taken in the first chapter of the book of Numbers, be'echad lachodesh hasheni, that is mentioned specifically as to when that was done, and it was done on the first day of the second month. V'hamishkan hukam be'echad lachodesh harishon, and the Mishkan was set up on the first day of the first month. Shne'emar, as it states in Exodus chapter 40, Bayom hachodesh harishon, on the day, in other words, the first day. On the day of the first month, be'echad lachodesh, on the first day of the month, takim, etc. It says, you shall set up the tabernacle. V'haminyan hazeh, and this, umei haminyan hazeh, and from this particular counting of the half shekels, ne'esu ha'adanim, where we know that the sockets were made from this particular counting, mishkalim shalo, of the shkalim that were collected in this counting. Shne'emar, as it says, and this is clearer now, in Exodus 38, Lamed Chet, Vahi ve'at kikar kesef, it says, and the 100 talents of silver, latzeket, etc., were made to cast the sockets. And so from this you can conclude sheshtayim hayu, that in fact there were two sensai, I guess, right? Echat b'tchilat nidvatam, at the beginning when they made the donations for the construction of the tabernacle, achar yom hakippurim, and this was interesting that it took place after the Day of Atonement. that's when it was set up. And I thought, wow, never realized that again. But because I never read it anywhere. But the fact that Sukkot follows Yom Kippur, where we set up tabernacles, could allude to the construction of the tabernacle, and the fact that that God asks the Israelites to set up the tabernacle after Yom Kippur, when Yom Kippur represents the time when God forgave Israel, the Israelites, for the sin of the golden calf, and that's why it's become the Day of Atonement for all subsequent generations, that Sukkot also is connected to it. Until I read this Rashi in preparation for this particular class, never made that connection. Okay, and that was Yom Kippurim Bashana Harishona, in the first year. Va'achat Bashana Shniya, and one happened in the second year. Iyar, in the month of Iyar, which is the second month, right? Nisan, Iyar, second month. Mishahukam Hamishkan, once the tabernacle was actually erected. And of course, just to remind you that second shkalim counting went for the offerings, for the sacrifices. The imtomar, so you could argue about that. You could argue against that and say, "V'chi efshar shebishneim hayu Yisrael shavim shesh me'ot elef v'shloshet alafim v'chamesh me'ot v'chamishim." Is it possible, because the counting was identical, that on both sense, in the one year they were 600,000, 3,000. 550 in the first year, and they were exactly the same number the second year? Is that possible? Because with regards to the silver that was collected, it stated this. It stated also with regard to that was the number of people. Vayu kol hapekudim shesh ma'ot elef. It says in Bamidbar Aleph, the entire counting was 600,000, 3,550. How can you say that's possible if it happened in 2 different years? It's impossible that in the counting, at the time of the first counting, B'nai Yud Tet, here we go, that the 19-year-olds, Shana, the people that were 19 years old, Shelo Nimnu, who were not counted, Uvashniya Ne'esu B'nai Kaf, and then in the next year, they would now be 20 years old. And apparently it hadn't to do with the month, the specific month they were necessarily born. It had to do with the year they were born. So the next year, when the year changed, is how your age would be counted, the way they're doing it here. Tshuva l'davar. So the way we can answer this question, we have a response. Etzel shnot ha'anashim, okay, regarding the years of the people. Bashana achat nimnu. They were all counted the same year. In other words, between those two censi, they both account, in terms of people's ages, they occurred in the same year. And here we go. Aval leminyan yetziat Mitzrayim. But when we count from the Exodus from Egypt, hayu shtei shanim. That was 2 years. Why? Here it goes. The fish yetziat Mitzrayim minin minisan. Because when you count the number of years from the Exodus, you start with Nisan. That's the first month of the year, counting from the Exodus. Kamosh shaninu b'masechet Rosh Hashanah, as we learned out in the tractate Rosh Hashanah. V'nivneh hamishkan barishona. So the Mishkan was actually constructed in the first year, v'hukam bashniya, and then it was erected, it was already set up in the second year. Shenit chadsha shana ve'echad b'nisan. Why? Because the new year, the year turned over in the first of Nisan. Aval shnot ha'anashim, but when it comes to counting the number of years of age of the people, minuyin leminyan shnot olam. In that case, you start with the number of years of the world. In other words, matchilim mitishrei. You start in the month of Tishrei. Nimtzeu shnei haminyanim b'shana achat, and that's consequently you had the counting in the counting in the year in the still within the same year. Achat haminyan b'shana achat. Haminyan ha'irishon haya b'tishrei. The first counting was in the month of Tishrei. Remember, after Lachar Yom HaKippurim, which followed Yom HaKippurim, Shenitratzeh hamakom liYisrael, because the Holy One, God, was reconciled with the Jewish people, lisloach lahem, to forgive them, v'nitzdavu ala mishkan, and consequently they were given the commandment to set up and erect the tabernacle, v'asheni b'achad b'yar, and the second one was on the first day of Iyar, in that same year which started with Tishrei, and that's of course, that would be the 8th month, the first day of the 8th month. And so that's how you know they were all the same age and you get the same counting. Alavodat ohel moed, regarding the work of the tent of meeting, just a brief Rashi here to finish off the verse. Heina adanim shene'esu bu. This is referring to the sockets that were made with this particular silver. So, and we'll pick up, God willing, tomorrow. So right here at verse 17, let's take this and I'll put it right here. And that's where we'll start tomorrow. I'm going to stop the share.
And Rabbi, and then